I knew something inside my life had cracked the moment I watched a gift meant for me nearly destroy someone else. It was the kind of betrayal that does not fade, the kind that changes the way you breathe, the way you trust, the way you look at the people closest to you. One moment, everything felt ordinary. The next, I was staring at the terrifying truth that danger had been sitting at my table, smiling at me, studying me, waiting. I never imagined my life would unravel because of a simple bottle of wine, but that was only the beginning of a nightmare I never saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 63 years old, I have grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of my life in Carmel by the sea. Most mornings begin with the soft percussion of waves rolling against the rocks behind my house, a sound that has become as familiar to me as my own breathing. I rise before the sun lifts itself over the water, slip into my kitchen, and begin the small rituals that anchor my days. I grind fresh coffee beans, preheat the oven, and pull out bowls and flour as if the recipes were held somewhere in my bones. For nearly 40 years, I owned a small bakery on Ocean Avenue, and though I sold it after my husband passed away, I still bake as if the town expects my doors to open at dawn. Carmel by the Sea is a town that seems almost too beautiful to be real. The air carries the scent of cypress trees and salt, and the houses sit close together like old friends guarding one another. People know each other by name, and they tend to remember the minor details of a life, such as who prefers blueberry scones and who is allergic to almonds. In a place like this, the familiar feels eternal, and change moves slowly, like fog across the shoreline. My son Daniel lives an hour and a half north in San Jose, where he works as a systems engineer. He is 38 now, responsible, steady, and careful with his words. He has always been the kind of man who tries to keep peace, even when peace asks too much of him. His wife, Julianne Rivera, is 35 and works in marketing for a winery in Napa Valley. She is poised and confident, someone who enters a room as if she has already measured its temperature. She has a habit of looking at people as though she is evaluating their long-term usefulness, and although I try to ignore that quality, it lingers in my mind more often than I care to admit. Her mother, Monica Rivera, is nearly my age and as warm as a quilt fresh from the dryer. She visits occasionally when she travels through the coast, and we have grown comfortable enough to share tea, old stories, and the aches of getting older. I have always believed Monica deserved a daughter who softened rather than sharpened her edges, but that is not my place to judge. The morning everything shifted began quietly, without any warning. I had just taken a tray of lemon shortbread from the oven when I heard a firm knock at the door. A delivery driver handed me a box tied with a gold ribbon. Inside was a bottle of Pinot Noir, deep red and expensive, the kind of wine I would never buy for myself. A handwritten card lay tucked beside it, signed neatly by Julianne. The message wished me a lovely week and praised me for being such an important part of the family. The words were elegant, generous, and entirely unlike her usual tone. I stood in my kitchen holding that bottle, watching the light cut across the glass like a thin blade. Something inside me stirred, a small ripple of unease that I could not name. I placed the bottle on the counter, next to a cooling rack of cookies, and tried to push the feeling away. But even then, before anything had truly begun, I sensed that this gift would change far more than my afternoon. If you're still watching and this beginning pulled you in, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. I stood in my kitchen for several minutes after opening the gift box, trying to shake off the faint ripple of unease that the bottle had stirred in me. It felt strange to receive something so extravagant without any warning, and even stranger that the handwriting on the card looked unusually formal, as if Julianne had practiced each loop and curl with the rehearsed intention. I was reaching for a towel to wipe down the counter when my phone vibrated loudly on the table. Julianne's name filled the screen, glowing in bright letters, as if it had something urgent to announce. The moment her face appeared on the video call, I sensed a tension that did not match her smile. Her expression looked too polished, too prepared, like a photograph pasted over something less pleasant beneath it. Her voice came out in a brightness that felt stretched thin. She asked how I was, and then immediately asked if the delivery had arrived. When I lifted the box to show her, her eyes darted to the corner of her screen, as if she was watching something else in the room with her. There was a stiffness in her posture that I had not seen before. She asked whether I had opened the wine. The question came too quickly, almost layered on top of itself, and when I told her I had not, her face froze for a split second before she recovered. She began to encourage me, gently at first, then with a kind of urgency that pressed through the screen. I found myself paying more attention to the way her jaw tightened than to the actual words she spoke. The more she insisted, the more the back of my neck tingled with a familiar warning. Years of working with people at the bakery had taught me to recognize the tiny shifts in expression that revealed a person's hidden intentions. I gave her a polite explanation about saving the wine for a more fitting moment, and I added that I rarely drank when I was alone. The line of her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly when I said that. She paused before replying, and during that pause I felt something click inside me, a kind of internal alert rising quietly. She seemed disappointed, but not in the way someone would be if a gift went unopened. It was closer to frustration, as if I had disrupted a rhythm she had carefully set in place. Before I could question my own thoughts, I heard a soft knock at the door. When I opened it, Monica Rivera stood on my porch holding a basket filled with pears and lemons. She had driven down the coast to visit a friend and decided to stop by. Her presence was a comfort, a familiar warmth that contrasted sharply with the tension still lingering from the call. I invited her in, and she stepped into the kitchen just as Julianne's voice echoed faintly from the phone. When I mentioned that her mother had arrived unexpectedly, Julianne's expression changed in an instant. The brightness vanished from her voice, replaced by a strain that sounded almost brittle. She asked how long Monica planned to stay, and when I answered, the silence on the other end felt heavy and unmistakably uneasy. I found myself wondering why the thought of her own mother joining me for lunch would trouble her so intensely. After the call ended, I told Monica about the gift and about Julianne's reaction. She tried to brush it off as stress from work, but her brow furrowed in a way that betrayed her doubt. As we set the table together, I caught myself glancing at the bottle. The sunlight poured through it, casting a red reflection across the counter. The color was beautiful, yet something in it made me hesitate. I could not explain why, but I felt that this bottle carried more weight than an ordinary gift. If you're still following and feeling the tension building, comment number 2 below to let me know you're here. Now, let's continue with chapter 3. I knew something was wrong the moment Monica set her fork down. It was subtle at first, just a small tremor in her fingers, the kind that could easily be mistaken for age or fatigue. But then she pressed her palm to the table as though the room had tilted beneath her. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, leaving her skin the pale shade of candle wax. She swallowed hard, as if trying to push down a wave of nausea, and when her eyes lifted to meet mine, they looked strangely unfocused, like she was searching for a point in the distance that she could no longer locate. She tried to stand. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as she pushed back from the table, but her knees buckled almost immediately. Instinct overtook fear, and I caught her by the arm before she collapsed. Her body was light but frighteningly limp, and the warmth I expected from her skin was replaced by a clammy sheen that made my pulse quicken. I guided her back into the chair, opening the windows to let the afternoon air drift through the room. Even the breeze felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, too quiet. I handed her a glass of water, though I doubted she could keep anything down. The tremor in her hands grew more pronounced, rippling up her arms. I had never seen her shake like that, not even during the worst days after her divorce. Something inside me snapped into urgency. My instincts, the same ones that had been stirring since Julianne's peculiar gift arrived, now screamed for action. I grabbed my phone and called emergency services. My voice sounded distant to my own ears as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, describing Monica's sudden dizziness, weakness, and nausea. When the dispatcher asked what she had consumed before the symptoms began, my throat tightened around the truth. I told him Monica had only eaten lunch and taken a single sip of the wine that had been delivered to my porch that morning. The silence that followed felt weighted, as though the man on the other end already knew this was not something ordinary. The paramedics arrived quickly, their boots thudding across my porch and into my kitchen. One of them examined Monica's pupils with a small flashlight, his expression tightening with a seriousness that unsettled me. He commented quietly that her symptoms did not resemble simple alcohol sensitivity. They lifted her onto the stretcher with practiced movements, securing her gently but firmly. I followed close behind, unable to shake the fear pulling in my stomach. Inside the ambulance, the monitor beeped in sharp, steady intervals. The numbers on the screen changed too rapidly for me to understand, but the paramedic's concerned eyes told me everything I needed to know. He continued asking questions about the wine, the timing, the symptoms, all while adjusting equipment with swift efficiency. I felt helpless, gripping the metal railing as the vehicle sped toward the hospital. At the emergency department, a physician met us immediately. She listened to my explanation, her expression sharpening when I mentioned the wine again. She ordered toxicology tests without hesitation. As they wheeled Monica away for evaluation, another staff member quietly stepped aside to alert hospital security, which meant one thing: they saw potential poisoning. A police officer arrived shortly after. He introduced himself gently but spoke with the seriousness of someone who dealt with danger daily. He asked where the wine had come from and whether I still had the bottle. I retrieved it from my bag, along with the birthday card in Julianne's elegant handwriting. He bagged both carefully, labeling them as evidence. As I stood alone in the cold hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the truth settled over me like a shadow. My uneasy feeling had not been paranoia. This was the beginning of something far darker, and the gift Julianne had so sweetly insisted upon was at the center of it. My world had just shifted, and I knew it would not shift back. If you're still watching and sensing that something darker is coming, comment number 3 below, so I know you're staying with the story. Now, let's head into chapter 4. The hours after Monica was taken into the emergency department felt stretched and strangely hollow, as though time itself had thickened. I sat in a plastic chair just outside the curtained space where the physicians were running tests, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles ached. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp and unsettling, and every muffled voice from the hallway made me flinch. I kept replaying the way Monica had swayed, the way her color had drained, the way her breath had grown thin. The nurses moved around me with calm precision, yet their quick glances toward my corner held something else, something that looked like worry they were not allowed to voice. A physician approached at last. Her expression was carefully neutral, but the tautness around her mouth betrayed the seriousness of the situation. She explained that they were running toxicology tests and that they needed more time before offering any conclusions. I tried to nod, but my neck felt stiff, almost unwilling. Her tone said enough. This was not a simple reaction to wine. Noah arrived only moments after the physician left. His steps were hurried, uneven, as if he had run part of the way from the parking lot. When he saw me, confusion washed over his face first, then concern, then disbelief. I could sense him trying to make sense of a situation that should never have existed in his mind. He kept glancing toward the room where they were treating Monica, searching for a simple explanation. His first instinct was to believe this was nothing more than an unfortunate medical fluke. He wanted it to be a harmless coincidence, a mistake, anything other than the darker truth forming in my chest. I told him everything that had happened, from the moment the gift arrived on my porch to the moment Monica collapsed. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from confusion to alarm. He asked how one sip could possibly have caused so much harm. His voice trembled slightly, and he ran a hand through his hair with agitation. I did not have answers for him, only suspicions that terrified me more with each passing second. Noah pulled out his phone and called Julianne. The first call went unanswered, then the second, then the third. Each attempt increased the tension carved into his jaw. When she finally called back, I heard the faint edges of her voice through the speaker. Her tone was strangely composed, almost too composed. She asked what had happened, and when Noah replied that Monica had fallen ill at my home, her first question was not about Monica's condition. Instead, she asked whether I had allowed Monica to drink the wine. The sharpness in her phrasing sent a cold prickle up my spine. When the call ended, Noah sat down heavily beside me. Doubt clouded his features. For the first time, he considered the possibility that the wine might have been connected to what happened, although he tried to push the thought away. I could see the conflict building inside him, a struggle between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his mother. Later, when we drove to his home, the unease only deepened. Julianne was nowhere to be found, and the quiet inside the house felt unnatural. The kitchen counter, where the wine box had originally sat, was now completely bare. The tissue paper remained neatly folded, but the bottle that should have been there was gone. Papers on the desk appeared disturbed, and a cabinet that normally stayed shut had been left slightly ajar. Something had been moved, and not by accident. I watched Noah absorb each detail, his face tightening with dread. He whispered that Julianne must have taken the bottle, but the tremor in his voice suggested he no longer believed it was innocent. We left the house with more questions than answers, and each unanswered question felt like a stone added to my chest. My first attempt to understand what had happened had failed completely. Worse, I sensed that this failure was only the beginning of a far more dangerous truth waiting to surface. If you're still here, and the twists are keeping you curious, comment number 4 below to tell me you're following every step. Now, let's move on to Chapter 5. The hallway outside Monica's room felt colder than it had earlier in the day, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. When the physician motioned for me to step aside, I sensed immediately that the news would change everything. Her expression was steady, but her eyes revealed the weight of what she was about to say. She handed me a printed summary of the toxicology results, the papers trembling slightly in my hands before I even began to read them. The unfamiliar scientific terms blurred together at first, yet the physician's voice cut through the haze with a steady clarity. She explained that the substance found in Monica's blood was a toxic chemical often associated with industrial solvents. It did not belong in wine, food, or anywhere near the human body. My heart thudded as she continued. The toxin had been mixed at a concentration that made it nearly undetectable in taste, and if Monica had consumed even 2 or 3 additional sips, the outcome would have been catastrophic. The thought of losing her to something so deliberate carved a hollow ache through my chest. The physician placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, reassuring me that Monica was stable for the moment, but her tone made it clear that her condition had hinged on a narrow margin of luck. An officer arrived soon after, requesting to speak with me and Noah together. When Noah returned from Monica's bedside, he looked drawn and unsteady. He listened to the officer's explanation in silence, but his eyes flicked repeatedly toward the toxicology printout, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less horrific. The officer spoke with deliberate calm, informing us that the bottle had already been collected and sent to the forensic laboratory. He explained that this case now fell under the category of a suspected intentional poisoning. His phrase settled into my mind with a heavy finality. Noah's reaction landed somewhere between disbelief and horror. I could see the internal fractures forming across his expression, the slow and painful recognition that this was no accident. The officer asked a series of questions about the origin of the wine, the delivery, the card, and the person who had gifted it. Each answer pulled Noah further into emotional turmoil. He whispered that Julianne would never have harmed anyone, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. A nurse approached us with fragile hope in her tone, informing us that Monica was stabilizing. She had responded well to the treatments, and her vital signs were improving. Relief washed through me, warm yet fleeting, because the ordeal outside her hospital room was only intensifying. The officer returned with new information. They had reviewed footage from Noah and Julianne's neighborhood. Julianne's car had been recorded leaving their driveway at high speed only hours earlier. She had not returned. She had not contacted Noah again. The timeline aligned too neatly with the moment she learned of Monica's hospitalization. The officer's expression grew grave as he explained that Julianne's departure had raised immediate red flags. This was no longer a matter of questions. It had become a matter of pursuit. As I listened, memories surged back in sharp fragments. The odd questions Julianne had asked me about my will, the insurance paperwork she had insisted on organizing, the way she often commented on how unpredictable life could be for people who lived alone. I had dismissed each moment individually, but now they rearranged themselves with chilling precision. Noah sat heavily in the nearest chair, covering his face with both hands. The officer continued his briefing, stating that Julianne was now a person of interest. Patrol units had been alerted. Nearby highways were being monitored. They believed she could pose danger not only to herself, but potentially to others, including me. I walked toward the large window overlooking the parking lot, the night sky settling over the city like a heavy blanket. The reflections on the glass blurred my own face, but the truth was painfully sharp. Julianne had disappeared, not to grieve, not to gather herself. She was running, and she was running for a reason. The small conference room beside the emergency department felt strangely insulated from the rest of the hospital, as if we had stepped into a sealed chamber where even sound struggled to exist. The walls were a dull beige, the kind used in every medical building across the country, yet tonight they seemed to press inward. I sat across from Noah while two officers prepared documents atop the metal table. The steady ticking of a wall clock became an intrusive reminder that time was pulling us forward, whether we were ready for it or not. My hands rested on the table, unmoving, the surface cold beneath my palms. When the lead investigator entered, the atmosphere shifted. He carried a folder thick with preliminary reports and forensic notes. He explained that the toxicology results were no longer a question of uncertainty, but a confirmation. The substance in Monica's bloodstream had been identified as a chemical compound commonly found in industrial solvents, one that required deliberate handling. His tone remained measured, but each word carried a gravity that left no room for denial. This was not an accident. Someone had planned harm, someone close. Noah leaned back in his chair as though seeking distance from the truth that was unfolding. His eyes darted between me and the officer, searching for an anchor that did not exist. The officer continued, outlining the steps the department was taking: the retrieval of the wine bottle, the forensic testing already underway, and the initiation of a formal investigation into Julianne's disappearance. The implication was unmistakable. Julianne was no longer merely missing. She was a suspect, possibly a dangerous one. The investigator then laid out what he believed would happen next. He explained that individuals who commit acts like this rarely disappear without attempting to maintain control of the narrative. He believed Julianne would reach out to Noah. He believed she needed him emotionally, strategically, or both. Noah's expression fractured at the idea. I saw the struggle surface in his posture, the conflict between the woman he loved and the growing mountain of evidence suggesting she had orchestrated something far darker. The officers explained their proposal. They wanted to monitor Noah's phone. They wanted to track any incoming calls or messages, and they wanted recordings. For a moment, my breath caught as I realized the implication. They wanted to place my son in the center of a strategy designed to draw Julianne out. The thought of him being used as a point of contact frightened me deeply, yet I understood the necessity. Avoiding the situation would not make it disappear. It would only allow it to grow more dangerous. Then another detail surfaced, one that chilled me beyond the information I had already received. The forensic team had found a partial fingerprint on the bottle that did not belong to Julianne. It was smudged, incomplete, but distinct enough to register as belonging to someone else. The possibility of another person being involved widened the threat in a way I had not anticipated. I felt the room tilt slightly, as if my understanding of the world had been rearranged by an unseen hand. Noah sat forward at last, elbows on his knees, face hidden in his hands. His entire world had shifted, and mine had shifted with it. I realized then that the choice was not only his, it was mine. The officers needed my cooperation, not only as a potential victim, but as the person Julianne had targeted. The only path left was to assist the investigation fully. I signed the document the investigator placed in front of me. Noah signed after me. When the officers activated the monitoring software on his phone, we both watched the screen illuminate, its glow reflecting the beginning of a plan neither of us had imagined needing. As we stepped back into the hallway, the lights above flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the floor. I paused by the window overlooking the parking lot, the night stretching outward in a quiet, uncertain expanse. There was no comfort in what lay ahead, but there was clarity. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. If you're still watching and the pressure of this turning point hit you, comment number 6 below, so I know you're right here with me. Now, let's move into Chapter 7. The hours that followed felt suspended in a strange, taut stillness, as though the walls of the hospital sensed what had shifted in my life and tightened around me. When I stepped back into the waiting area, the fluorescent lights cast a harsh gleam across the empty chairs. Their sharp brightness made the night outside the windows appear even darker, and for the first time since Monica arrived, I felt the full weight of what was unfolding. Every sound, every footstep in the hallway carried an edge that made my heart rise to my throat. 2 officers had taken positions outside Monica's room. Their presence should have comforted me, yet it only deepened my awareness of the danger that hovered in the air. The physician approached to give a brief update, explaining that Monica was stable but still unconscious. Her tone was gentle, but her words felt distant. I could not focus on anything except the faint rise and fall of Monica's chest beneath the blankets and the knowledge that someone had tried to take her life with deliberate intent. A lieutenant arrived not long after, carrying a tablet that displayed a flashing notification. He informed us that a regional alert had been issued. Julianne was now officially listed as a wanted suspect. Hearing her name spoken in that context brought a realization so sharp it nearly stole my breath. I had suspected, feared, and reasoned my way toward the truth, but hearing it confirmed by law enforcement felt like a blade cutting through the last remnants of denial. Noah stood next to me, his shoulders slumped forward as though the air had grown too heavy to carry. He kept rubbing his hands together, an unconscious attempt to steady himself. Guilt radiated from him in quiet waves. I saw it in his downcast eyes, in the way he avoided looking at the officers, and in the tremor that ran through his voice whenever he attempted to speak. He blamed himself for not seeing the signs, not asking questions, not noticing the cracks in the woman he had promised his life to. As news traveled through the family and community, my phone buzzed nonstop. Relatives sent messages filled with concern. Neighbors asked if I needed somewhere to stay. Friends offered prayers and reassurances. Their kindness should have comforted me, but instead it reminded me how quickly ordinary life could shatter. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and strangely disconnected from the world I had known. The officers later returned with an update about the fingerprint that did not match Julianne. It indicated a second presence, a second set of hands involved with the bottle. The thought sent a cold ripple through me. If someone else had assisted Julianne or had knowledge of her intentions, then the danger extended far beyond one unstable woman. The idea that another unknown person might be watching, waiting, or lurking in the shadows unsettled me in a way I could not put into words. When an investigator called with a warning that Julianne might attempt to return to the area, the fear settled deeper into my bones. I was told not to return home under any circumstances. The hospital was safer. Monica was protected, but safety felt like an illusion now, thin and breakable. I stayed near her bedside, watching her rest, thinking about how little control a person truly has over life once someone else decides to cross the line into violence. Night crept over the hospital in a slow, suffocating wave. The corridors emptied, leaving only the hum of machinery and the rhythmic footsteps of the officers on duty. I stood by the window at the end of the hall, staring out at the black sky and the faint glow of street lamps in the distance. Somewhere out there, Julianne was awake, aware, and unraveling. And the consequences were only beginning. Morning arrived without warmth. I woke in the same chair where I had drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, my neck stiff and my thoughts tangled. The hospital looked gentler in daylight, yet the brightness did nothing to lessen the tension that had settled into my bones. Nurses moved quietly through the corridor, their routine steady and practiced, but every sound still felt amplified to me. I could not shake the instinct that danger was only one step behind us. An investigator appeared shortly after sunrise. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. They had not found Julianne. He explained that although officers had traced her car onto a highway heading north, she had abandoned it and continued on foot. They believed she might have switched vehicles with outside assistance. Hope flickered briefly at the idea of progress, but it dimmed again as I realized she remained free. The uncertainty pressed heavily on my chest. The investigator then revealed what they had uncovered from Julianne's phone records. They had accessed older data, including search history she had tried to delete. The topics chilled me: toxic chemicals, staged gifts, inheritance procedures, and my weekly routines. It was no longer possible to imagine that the poisoning was impulsive. It had been planned with intention, patience, and calculation. A knot tightened in my stomach as the truth formed clearer outlines. Julianne had not lost control. She had been executing a plan. Noah joined the investigators at the table, handing over documents they had requested. He looked hollowed out, as though grief had carved deep shadows beneath his eyes. He had brought emails, financial statements, and even old notes Julianne had saved on her devices. Each detail he shared seemed to push him further from the life he thought he had. Watching him unravel was almost as painful as discovering what had been done to Monica. I wished I could comfort him more, but we were standing in the wreckage of something neither of us fully understood. The investigator returned to the matter of the unidentified fingerprint. They had matched it to a man loosely associated with Julianne through an online account registered under an alias. His record included a past investigation for financial misconduct. The implication left me cold. Julianne had not acted entirely alone. Someone else had touched that bottle. Someone else had a role in this conspiracy. I found myself growing resolute. The fear that had chased me for days began to harden into determination. I asked the investigator to let me review the packaging from the gift. When they brought it in, I focused on every detail. A faint scent lingered on the ribbon, something chemical that did not belong with wine. The investigator noted it immediately and sent the packaging for expanded testing. It was the first moment that made me feel as though I was helping instead of merely surviving. Before leaving, the officers outlined a new safety protocol. I was placed under temporary protection. They instructed me to remain inside the hospital, avoid unknown numbers, and alert staff about any unusual movement around Monica's room. It was not a life I had imagined for myself, but I nodded. I had no intention of making Julianne's task easier. When the hallway finally cleared and silence settled again, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. The words were simple, but they struck like a blade drawn across ice. I will take back what is mine. My breath caught. Julianne had found a way to reach me. The hunt was no longer distant. It was here. If you're still watching and ready to learn how everything finally unravels, comment number 8 below to let me know you're staying to the very end. Now, let's move on to the final chapters. The morning after everything ended felt unreal, as if my mind had not yet caught up with the fact that I had survived. I woke to the quiet stillness of my home in Duluth, Minnesota, the lake outside smooth as glass and reflecting a pale band of sunrise over the horizon. The house carried the faint scent of fresh paint and cleaning solvents from the repairs made after Amber forced her way inside. Even with the walls patched and the broken window replaced, I could sense the echo of fear that had once filled these rooms. Yet beneath that was something steadier, a grounded calm that came only after walking through fire and realizing I was still standing. My body felt heavy with fatigue, not just from sleepless nights, but from weeks of bracing myself against threats I once could not have imagined. There was an ache in my shoulders that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with the constant, exhausting effort of protecting myself. Still, I recognized a change in me, a hardness I had not possessed before, as though some inner spine had strengthened. I found myself thinking about how close I had come to disappearing quietly from this world. Somehow, the danger sharpened the significance of simply existing in my own kitchen again. A call came from Detective Rowan shortly after breakfast. Her tone was steady as she told me that Amber now faced multiple felony charges, including the murder of her previous husband, attempted murder of me, attempted murder of Lucas, and multiple counts of fraud and identity manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming, including her own recorded confession. There would be no trial filled with theatrics, no chance for her to twist the narrative again. She would be sentenced to life in prison. I listened with a long exhale, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply relieved that the circle had finally closed. Later that afternoon, Lucas drove up the long gravel path to my house. His posture carried the weight of everything he had learned about the woman he once loved, but there was also a new steadiness in his eyes. He told me he had started therapy, taking leave from his job to put his life back together. We sat together on the wooden steps outside, looking out at the calm sweep of Lake Superior. He apologized for doubting me, his voice ragged with guilt. I told him I understood how deception works, how Amber had shaped his world to isolate him from the truth. That moment of honesty between us felt like stitching together fabric torn too suddenly. In the days that followed, I handled the practical matters left behind. I updated my legal documents, changed every password, and let go of the naive notion that danger only comes from strangers. Each small act made me feel more in control again. Healing was not a dramatic revelation, but a series of quiet decisions to reclaim my space, my safety, and my steadiness. That evening, I made a cup of tea and watched the lake turn silver under the fading light. The water looked calm again, and for the first time in a long while, I felt calm too. The past weeks had left scars I would not soon forget, but they had not taken my life or my son from me. In that silence, I understood that surviving was its own kind of victory, one earned through instinct, courage, and the stubborn will to keep living. I spent the evening sitting alone in my living room, letting the warm lamplight spill across the old family photographs that lined the shelves. The house felt quieter than usual, not with the silence of isolation, but with the kind of stillness that comes after a storm finally exhausts itself. As I looked around, I realized how much my life had reshaped itself. I was no longer the woman who moved through her days, believing danger belonged to someone else's world. I had crossed a threshold I could never return from, carrying both caution and a sense of strength I had not known I possessed. When I thought back on the early days with Amber, I saw clearly the moments when my instincts had whispered warnings I chose to dismiss. It was not naivety that blinded me, but the desire to welcome someone into the family, to believe that my son had found a partner who meant well. That desire made me vulnerable in ways I did not recognize until much later. It is a harsh lesson to learn that the people who can harm us most deeply are often the ones we try hardest to embrace. Yet the more I reflected on everything, the more I understood the value of the instincts I had once doubted. A lifetime of experience had been trying to guide me, and I would never again ignore that quiet inner voice. It had been right every time Amber smiled just a little too long or stepped just a little too close. I know now that intuition is not fear. It is survival. What carried me through the worst of it was Lucas. Even in the moments when he doubted me, my love for him anchored me. The memory of facing Amber in my own kitchen stays with me, but so does the certainty that I stood firm because I refused to let anything take me from my son. That truth steadied me then, and it steadies me still. Our relationship is healing now. Lucas comes by on weekends, helping with the porch or trimming the hedges. Those simple acts mean more to me than any apology. They are gestures of rebuilding, reminders that we are both still here and still choosing each other. As night settled over Lake Superior, I stepped onto the porch and breathed in the cold Minnesota air. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, its surface calm but not empty. I watched the ripples spread and fade and understood that I too would settle again, not unchanged, but unbroken. In the quiet that follows any great upheaval, life reveals its deepest truths. Hard seasons have a way of stripping away illusions and reminding us that strength is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move through it with our eyes open. Healing rarely comes in dramatic waves. It arrives in small, steady moments, the kind that teach us to trust our instincts, guard our peace, and honor the wisdom time has earned for us. And when the world feels shaken, there is solace in knowing that calm always returns, just as light follows even the longest night. Thank you for staying with this story. If it moved you or sparked a thought, I would love to hear your voice in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, do not forget to follow, like, and subscribe.